Hello, you're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Ali Malani. Zoe isn't with us this week, so it's a throwback to 2023. You've just got me. Coming up on the show, we'll be reliving the best time of the year, Labour Party conference. From Starmer and Farage's racism row to how Labour's announcements will actually impact you and your life. We will be talking all this and more later in the programme. As always, you can find us at Politics Uncensored UK on social media. But before we get into the Week Unwrapped, I just wanted to say we're coming to you on Thursday in the 2nd of October, and we've just gotten word this morning of a terrorist attack or an alleged terrorist attack on a Manchester synagogue, and all of our thoughts and prayers at FUBAR and particularly on Politics Uncensored go to the victims, their families and the Jewish community at large. As we bring you the show today, we don't have much details. We don't know who the perpetrator is. We don't know many details about how the attack unfolded. And so while this is an incredibly important story, we're not going to be speaking about it directly this week, but we will next week, largely because we don't want to speculate without all of the information at hand. But we did want to, at the top of the show, send our best thoughts, prayers and wishes to the victims, their families and the Jewish community at large, and make it clear from our perspective that any form of hatred, including the rise of anti-Semitism in our communities, is completely intolerable. We move to the Week Unwrapped. Joining me this week for the Week Unwrapped is comedian and podcaster Milo Edwards, who's currently on tour with his show, How Revolting, Sorry to Offend. Milo, thanks so much for joining us. Talk to me about your show. Is it revolting and why are you offending me?
Hi, lovely to be here. The title How Revolting, Sorry to Offend came from something my girlfriend at the time's grandmother said in response to a picture of my arse that she received over WhatsApp. And if you want any more explanation on that story, I guess you have to come to the show because it's a long story, but I do talk about it in the show. Hopefully I won't be revolting or offending anyone during the show. That's the idea. Yeah. But you never know.
I really did think you were about to tell me that it was your girlfriend's grandma coming to your show and her reaction to the show was how revolting.
If only. I think her coming to the show would indicate a level of approval of me that she does not have.
Do you show the picture at the show by any chance?
I think I was there. The picture is on the flyers for the show that I was giving out in Edinburgh and Melbourne at the comedy festivals, but we don't show it in the show, no. But the picture does exist. It can be accessed.
I do have to tell you, we're going to be talking about Labour Party conference, and there were moments at Labour Party conference where I think I would have rather seen that picture than been in Liverpool, but we are where we are.
Speaking of people showing their ass, Keir Starmer's speech.
The annual Convention of Nerds came to town in Liverpool, and we're not talking about Comic-Con, though I will be at Comic-Con later in November. Was Labour Party conference. Starmer's speech focused on migration, on Farage and apprenticeships, with some claiming it was a desperate attempt for him to save his job, and he may have had a stay, with the speech going down fairly well for now. Milo, have you ever had the absolute pleasure of going to a Labour Party conference?
I haven't, no. I think I don't have the adrenaline tolerance necessary to sit through a full day of Labour Party conference.
How much of it did you see? Did you see much coverage? What did you see of Labour Party conference? And give me your reaction to the things that you've seen.
Look, much like I'm sure many of your listeners, I'm addicted to my phone. I'm reading politics news on Twitter. I got to see all about Keir Starmer's vision for the real Britain. You know, cutting the halftime orange slice, knocking on your neighbour's door. And I thought it was sort of striking how Starmer has this ability to talk about something that's ostensibly quite normal, but sound like the weirdest guy who's ever lived. Like the way that he loves football, like he genuinely loves football, like he plays football, he watches football all the time. But every time he talks about football, he sounds like one of those Men in Black aliens who's been teleported into human skin for the first day. It's genuinely remarkable how out of place he can sound talking about stuff he must genuinely know about.
Yeah, there's a scene from Family Guy where they're talking about Fox News, and I think it's Lois is working at Fox News, and I think but the dog turns to her and says, even things that were once true, once said by Fox News, become lies. And it reminds me of what you're saying here. Even things that are actually cool in society, once said by Keir Starmer, become uncool.
That's very funny how sort of profound that quote sounds, given that it was from Brian Griffin, the talking dog from Family Guy.
Why do you think it is? Why does he have such an issue with appearing normal? I mean, is it all politicians? We do have a tendency in British politics to promote nerds, Can I say? Like, by the way, I say this as a politician in the UK. We're all rather weird.
Yeah, we do. I mean, well, I think this is it's a real Labour Party thing, right? Like the Labour Party is run by
Thanks
nerds.
for that, by the way.
And they love nerds. Yeah, but it's true. I mean, like, look, I'm a left-wing guy. Broadly speaking, Labour is more aligned with what I would consider my team than most of the other guys are. But at the same time, you look at some of the Tory politicians we've had, and you're like, well, at least they're kind of fun. Like, you know, I do think Boris Johnson is a more relatable guy than Starmer, because like even though Boris Johnson is basically an aristocrat, because there's something about, like, I saw a video the other week of Boris Johnson driving his like 4 kids somewhere, or 4 of his kids, I should say, in a like clapped out M-Reg Toyota Previa, just looking like he was having the worst day of his life. And I was like, you know what? There is something relatable about that man, because he's known suffering. Whereas Starmer, he feels like he was born wearing a suit. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like every time he talks about anything, it's like, I have triangulated what the correct response to this is. I have determined that the best season of Big Brother is this one, because I've looked at all the focus groups, and the person I would vote for on Love Island is Tommy Fury. Thank you.
That's not a bad
I don't believe
Starmer
he really
impression,
thinks anything. Thank you. I've been practicing.
You mentioned Boris Johnson driving his kids, or 4 of his kids. I think if he was to drive all his kids, he'd need one of those famous red buses.
Yeah, we don't know exactly what proportion of Boris Johnson's kids that is. All we know is there were at least 4.
Yeah, it's one of the great mysteries of life, is how many kids he's got. Is he the last like charismatic political leader we've had? He's one of few, right? Because look, I went up against Boris in 2019, and so I don't have a lot of positive things to say about him. But one thing I can say about him is the guy was entertaining. He was like, he had a bit of charisma and a bit of, is charm the right word? It was entertaining, right?
Yeah, and I think this is something.
And if you look at the class now, like whether it's Starmer, Badenoch, I mean Farage is a little bit. He's got a bit more about him, but not much. And then Ed Davey, who, you know, at the best of times is boring. There's not a lot of charisma to go between them, is there?
Yeah. Well, what you can say for Ed Davey is he's at least a bit likable, which I think is a low bar, but I think that's where we've gotten to in British politics now. It's like that he just seems sort of like he would be pleasant enough at the pub, and then people are like, God, what a relief. Which I think probably says we're in a sorry state of affairs. But yeah, I think there's and I understand where this comes from with left-wing politics. And again, I say this as a left-wing guy, that there's we do sort of like recoil a bit from charismatic people. I think possibly having been burned a bit with Blair. And I think also in the sense that, like, I think being on the left is very being concerned with like being right about stuff. But the thing is that being right about stuff is quite boring. And the right answer is often a very boring answer. And I think that we often undervalue the extent to which someone can put that boring answer in a more fun way. Because you look at people like Johnson or even like Trump, who like basically they are completely ill-equipped to address the problems that they're being faced with, because their politics is incapable of answering these questions. Like it's run out of road. Like you've got, with that kind of conservatism, you've got nowhere to go with the kind of massive existential issues that we now face globally and on a national level as well. But what they are good at is selling it to people. Like, you watch a Trump speech, it's entertaining. Like, the guy's funny. Like, the stuff he's saying is bad, but the way he's saying it is great.
Have you seen the AI sombrero video that they've put out?
No.
So obviously there's a massive there's a shutdown of the American government happening. So there's this big fight between the Democrats and the Republicans, and whether it was Donald Trump or JD Vance, I don't remember. But they put out, Hakeem Jeffries is the leader of the Democratic Party right now in the House. And they put out a video where they AI'd him in a sombrero with this big massive mustache, with like this AI voice over the top saying it's all the Republicans' fault. And it was tweeted from the official accounts. And JD Vance was asked about it in a press conference at the White House. And he kind of laughs it off and says, what I can promise definitively is if the Democrats end the government shutdown, the sombrero videos will stop. And the whole place started laughing. And it was that little bit of like self-deprecating humor and being able to laugh at themselves that I don't know if any politician here would have the wit to respond to a question a little bit self-deprecating. Is there anyone, like, that was a weird rant from me. Is there anyone anyone that you like, anyone you think has a bit of charisma in British politics? Doesn't have to be from the left or even the, like, any particular party.
Who do I like? Who do I find entertaining in British politics?
Isn't it really sad that how hard it is to think of someone?
Yeah, it is. It is pretty tough. I do. Yeah, I have my reservations about nailing my colours to any mast at this stage.
I always think I don't agree with the whole her politics. Emily Thornberry's quite funny. Nadine Dorries is good to laugh at sometimes.
Nadine Dorries, I mean, God knows, I love her. I love her ride or die. You know?
Yeah.
She, at the end of the day, she loves Boris Johnson for whatever reason, and I appreciate the sort of samurai-like loyalty which she has to Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
You don't often see that in politics these days.
So I've been on my rundown sheet here. I've got a meme that I think you put out. So Keir Starmer's speech, which I'll ask you about in a bit, included a bit about what real Britain is, and then the official Labour account tweeted a 3-part picture of, and I don't have the original because so many fake versions have come out. I don't actually know which one the original is now.
I've got the original.
Okay, so in a second I'm going to ask you to read the original bit out.
Okay, sure.
But it ends with "That's real Britain," and Twitter has had a field day editing with what everyone thinks real Britain is. Do you want to read the original? And then I'm just going to get a thumbs up from my producer.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to say the N word on air? Not that N word. If you look
This is a great example of where
am I allowed to
censorship
say
sometimes does you dirty, because that's made it sound so much worse than it is.
No, that one. This one. I'm allowed to say that. Okay.
There are 2 N-words and you're not allowed to say either of them. That was a Trump quote from this week.
The problem is, Mano, we're live, so that's now out there. You say the original one, and then I'm going to read your one out.
Yeah. Okay, I'll do it as Starmer. Painting a fence, running the raffle, cutting the half-time orange, or even just that gentle knock on the door, which checks your neighbour is all right. That's real Britain.
And so you've taken that, and I'm not going to do the accent, and written, getting bag in at the pub on a Thursday, placing an impossible lacquer on the football, or even something as simple as posing as a 14-year-old girl online to entrap a nonce in a pub car park. That's real Britain. That was the N-word. Nonce was the N-word, just for absolute clarity.
On this one occasion, the N-word was nonce.
For absolute clarity of everybody listening, it was nonce.
The one time you're allowed to say the N-word is now, but it's a specific time.
Zoe, this is what happens when you're not in the studio. Do you think they did this on purpose? Because, you can't have not foreseen that everyone would edit this in 1,000,001 different ways, right?
I think the only way you can interpret the Labour Party at this point is surface level. That everything that they're doing, they genuinely think is good, because there's no other way that makes sense. I think they're so out of touch, because they've kind of sacked everyone who's in touch. Because if you try and if you're in the Labour Party now and you try and bring up something that's relevant to a lot of people in the country, be it cost of living, or Gaza, or whatever it might be, hot button issues, they're kind of no, because we're not going to do anything about that. So if you keep going on about that, you're sacked. And so as a result, it's a bit I feel like it's a bit like what happened to the Tories in the kind of Theresa May administration, where because basically all of the Tories who had half a brain were all Remainers, then they just kept being well, the version of Brexit that you're proposing is suicide. Theresa May kept going well, you're fired then. But then after a year of that, you've sacked anyone who knows how to run the government. And so you're left with Jacob Rees-Mogg and the rest of the Looney Brigade. And we've now got the Labour equivalent of that, where you've got all of the most former student politics, hollow suits. Wes Streeting looking like he's been inflated 10%. He looks like a badly photoshopped version of himself. Just parroting the most thin gruel of a government line. They don't have an ounce of charisma between any of them. So of course the speeches they churn out are just drivel, because it's they have nothing to actually offer. Beyond vague sort of nostalgia. They can't really be okay, here's how we're going to put some money in your pocket, because they're not going to.
Did you watch the speech or no?
I haven't watched the whole thing, no.
Have you seen some clips, or because it's actually?
I've seen bits here and
amongst
there.
Labour members, it went down pretty well. I gotta say, at conference, the people are saying it's his best speech, largely because he finally took on reform in some way, shape, or form, even though it's gotten a little bit of backlash. You know what? I was at conference for my sins, and one of the big debates at conference was there seemed to be a mood of, look, Starmer's going to go, so who's next? And I'll tell you some of the names that were bandied about. Andy Burnham, obviously, number one, was the most popular politician there by a long
He does have a bit of charisma. Let's be fair to Andy Burnham.
And
there's a little bit of
great eyelashes. I've only seen him a couple of times in person, but I shook hands with him at a conference. We were passing each other on an escalator, and he does have phenomenal eyelashes.
A bit of DILF energy from Andy Burnham. Put
energy?
The marker down now. DILF energy. The D word.
Yeah, that's. I'm not going to do that again. Wes Streeting's name came up quite well, quite often. Angela Rayner came up. Clive Lewis came up. Richard Bergen came up. Who do you fancy? Anyone on the Labour benches?
Who do you fancy was an interesting choice of words.
Well, you've already given me Andy Burnham, so hit me.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, well, I don't
so
know.
look, it sounds like you're inclined to be on the left.
Yes. Oh, definitely.
Is there anyone in the Labour Party that could win you back?
I don't know. Maybe. I'm going to get torn to shreds for this, but maybe Burnham.
Yeah.
Depends what the policy platform is.
Why would you get torn to shreds? He's quite popular, isn't he?
Yeah, I think. Well, I wouldn't say that on the left. You know, who knows who's popular?
Yeah.
But I would say that. Andy Burnham. If the policy program was good, like if it was actually meaningfully to the left of the Starmer platform, then maybe. I think he's quite sort of charismatic and he doesn't have a huge amount of political baggage.
Isn't David Cameron to the left of the Starmer platform?
Well, yeah, I mean, arguably, yes. I mean, I don't think Bergen's really got much in the way of charisma or riz, as the young people say.
Yeah. Just last thing, mate, because we're running a little bit out of time. My producers have sent me the photo of your show, or it looks like your poster, where you are showing a tattoo on your arse, we'll say. Yeah. Is that a real tattoo?
No, it's temporary tattoo.
Okay. And this isn't the photo that your girlfriend's grandma saw?
So I don't know which. Is it the picture? Are there two people in the picture, or is it just me on my poster?
It's just you. It's from your Twitter account. It's pinned, and it's just you pulling your pants down on the sort of side of the poster.
Yeah. So that was like a staged photo that we took later for the poster. But there is like there is like a real original picture which used to be on the back of the flyers. Yeah, and it's me and my girlfriend at the time, both with our pants down, with a temporary tattoo on.
No, I do have to say you've broken a record on Politics Uncensored. It's the most I've said arse or on the show in 2 years of doing it. Last question for you: if you had to get a tattoo of any politician on your arse, who would you get?
Ooh, great question. Who would be the best tattoo?
Mugshot, like everything shoulder up.
Yeah, Mandelson. I think there'd be something funny about that.
All right, we're moving on now. Thank you so much. That was Milo. Everyone listening, make sure to check out Milo's show, How Revolting, Sorry to Offend. Make sure you follow Milo at Milo Edwards. Milo, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to take you off air now. Coming up on the show, we will be breaking down the racism row between Starmer and Farage, the two best bits that British politics has to offer, apparently. Stay tuned on Politics Uncensored. Welcome back to Politics Uncensored with me, Ali Malani. No Zoe this week, so it's just me, and we're going to do some reflecting on Labour Party conference. I spent all of this week in Liverpool with the Labour faithful, members, councillors, members of Parliament, as well as people from the charity sector, the third sector, and private businesses and enterprise trying to influence government to change policy. And we'll do some quick reflections on Labour Party conference. I was there from the Saturday, and I have to be really honest, the mood of conference, particularly in the first couple of days, was really dour and down. And I think it gives you a sense of the kind of momentum that the Labour Party was coming into the conference with. There was a lot less people at conference. Considering this is the party of government, that's pretty unusual. And a lot of Labour members seemed really down about how quickly the enthusiasm and the energy has disappeared from this government. And that started to pick up a little bit, or turn a little bit, as we got some policy announcements and as the speeches went up, although particularly Starmer's speech seemed to go down better than expected from party faithful. The other shadow that clearly loomed large throughout conference was that of Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham, who made it quite clear that there were MPs asking him to stand and potentially challenge the leader of the Labour Party. And there has been questions about Keir Starmer's leadership for months now. And the feeling at conference was, is it a question of when, not if, Keir Starmer resigns or is forced to move on? Although a lot of people thought Andy Burnham played his hand too clearly and seemed like he was stalking the horse a little bit too much. He was then later forced to do a kind of U-turn and say his focus was Manchester and he didn't intend to stand for leader of the Labour Party. All that being said, the members I spoke to at conference, and I spoke to a lot because we did some Vox Pops and we did quite a few interviews at conference, Andy Burnham was by far the most popular politician at Labour Party conference, by a landslide. The other names that we were hearing that were quite popular and people may see as future leadership potentials were people like Wes Streeting, Angela Rayner as a potential comeback was brought up. Clive Lewis was mentioned. Richard Bergen, by some on the left as well, was mentioned. One person mentioned Yvette Cooper to me. But there was this idea around conference that the next May elections are going to be the real test of the Starmer government. There were some announcements at conference that some seemed to go down particularly well. One did not. So NHS Online was announced by Wes Streeting. And the idea behind this, we don't have a whole lot of detail about what this will look like in practice. But the idea is that everybody should be able to access consultants, GPs and doctors via their phone, iPad or laptops, get prescriptions and diagnoses, if possible, on a digital platform. So that if someone lives in a rural part of England, for example, they don't have to drive to London or have the doctor drive up to where they are to be able to access some of the best consultants in the country and to be able to essentially bypass a lot of the queues by connecting people digitally and being able to prescribe them digitally as well. We don't have many data on that yet or details on that yet, but that was announced from conference floor. My favorite conference announcement, particularly given my history at the National Union of Students, was the reintroduction of maintenance grants, which is something that the NUS and many activists have been fighting for. So that was good to hear. Keir Starmer's speech included things like a shift from focus on half of all young people going to university to 2/3 of all young people either getting an apprenticeship or going to university, a shift towards valuing apprenticeships more, the view being that university isn't right for everybody. There was also a major U-turn. The two-child policy cap is reportedly going to be scrapped at the next budget by Rachel Reeves. Although what it's replaced with, we don't know quite yet the details, although James Medway may be able to point us in the right direction in a bit. The most unpopular thing that was announced or trailed during conference was Shabana Mahmood's plans on indefinite leave to remain. And this was the idea that a value has to be proven to the community before someone is given indefinite leave to remain. And that includes things like volunteering as well as the job that you do to prove value. This went down as really reactionary to reform and pandering to really far-right political ideologies and ideas. And I think Krishnan from Channel 4 News put it best to Rachel Reeves, essentially saying if an Indian doctor is working 60 to 70 hours a week, why do they then have to volunteer to prove their value to the community? Is that not in and of itself enough value to the community? So lots going on at party conference, but the major point was Keir Starmer's speech. And what seemed, were two sections. One, the key theme that I took away from his conference speech was his call for patience. There's a specific part of his speech where he turns to members, in essence, and asks for patience. And that's what half of this speech, to me, was actually directed to the room. And party conference speeches and party leaders' conference speeches are really important because it's an opportunity to speak to the country. You're pretty much given wall-to-wall coverage across news platforms, and you're guaranteed to get coverage on the headlines of what you say. But Starmer instead chose, for a big proportion of his speech, to be speaking what it sounded like to me to Labour Party members. He is clearly cognizant of the questions around his leadership, and he called in the room to the Labour faithful for patience, and that caught my ear. because it's clearly a leader who understands that Burnham seems like he's waiting in the wings, where Streeting looks like he may be waiting in the wings. And there were a lot of questions at the beginning of Cook-Off Conference as to whether Keir Starmer could survive. And so his call for patience was really interesting. And the tone of about half of the speech being to Labour Party members was particularly interesting and unusual, particularly for Starmer, who so often says we shouldn't talk to ourselves, but should talk to the country at large. The second part that was interesting was a direct and very clear pivot in the language and the political tactic being used in tackling reform.
Controlling migration is a reasonable goal. But if you throw bricks and smash up private property, that's not legitimate. That is thuggery. Free speech is a British value and we have guarded it for centuries. But if you incite racist violence and hatred, that is not expressing concern. It's criminal. Telling a Chinese takeaway owner to go home, that's not pride, that's racism.
So the allegations and accusations of racism and going into conference about their indefinite leave to remain policy of reform and the association of racism with reform has probably picked up the most amount of coverage and is a serious pivot. The criticisms the Starmer leadership was getting and the administration was getting was that they were parroting a lot of reform narratives and talking points. And there seems to be a conscious pivot away from that with the associations of racism with reform. And we saw that with what David Lammy said in his interviews after party conference. We saw that with what Shabana Mahmood said when she was asked about racism and whether Nigel Farage is racist. I think she used the phrase, if I'm not wrong, it's sometimes worse than racism because they use this issue for their political advantage. And so this seems to be a very, very direct pivot from what the narratives have been previously. And this was Farage's response.
I used to think the Prime Minister was a decent man, somebody that I could talk to and chat to. We might disagree on worldview, but I thought he was a profoundly decent human being. I am completely shocked at his behaviour. I hope when he wakes up tomorrow morning, he feels ashamed of what he has done. This is a desperate last throw of the dice from a Prime Minister who's in deep trouble, a Prime Minister who can't even command the support of half of his own party. But I'm sorry to say, I now believe that he is unfit to be the Prime Minister of our country.
What you heard there was, in layman's terms, a political tantrum being thrown by Nigel Farage, who at this moment can best be described as a snowflake. The reality is, if the people you walk with march with Tommy Robinson, they're racists. If the people that you walk with are consistently spouting anti-Semitic, Islamophobic narratives, that makes the movement around you racist. And you particularly, Mr. Farage, have previously said things like you've been on a train and you've heard foreign languages and that's not made you comfortable, and concerns about, I believe it was Romanian families moving in next door. So if the shoe fits, mate, wear it. Lots of things over conference, and we'll be keeping an eye on them over the coming weeks as the policies are announced and as we approach the budget. We'll definitely get Zoe's view when she returns, as she was also at conference chairing many panels and in loads of discussions with different members, with third-party charities and ministers. So we'll keep an eye on that. Joining us in a bit, we'll have James Medway, who will also talk to us about conference, particularly about what Rachel Reeves announced and what we can expect ahead of the budget. Join us next on Politics Uncensored. Welcome back. You're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Ali Milani. We've got James Medway in the studio. James is one of the key economic voices, particularly within Labour circles. James, thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk about Rachel Reeves' conference speech, where she has implied that there will be some sort of tax rises, but hasn't actually spoken much about what that would look like. Now, we're very close to the budget, so that may be why she hasn't directly announced anything in the budget. It was quite policy light in terms of announcement. She did directly state that she won't be relaxing her self-imposed rules on borrowing, saying that there is nothing progressive about government using 1 in every £10 of public money it spends on financing debt interests. This is a direct rebuke, I believe, of Andy Burnham's interventions at conference. And it seems so far that she is sticking true to what has been one of the central criticisms, both from the PLP and many on the left, ahead of the election, which is these self-imposed financial rules. What do you think about that?
Well, she's in a bind, entirely of her own making on the fiscal rules. These are the rules that she set down when she was Shadow Chancellor, so well before the election, basically saying that the government can only borrow to invest in things like building a new hospital or building a road or whatever, and they won't borrow for day-to-day spending. So people's salaries, the electricity that you pay for in that hospital, they won't borrow for that, which sounds pretty simple, but means in practice that the government doesn't have an awful lot of wiggle room. Right?
Yeah.
And relative to how much it gets in taxes and how much it can spend and how much it can borrow.
So
there's not much space there.
I really want to break this down because most of our audience listening will have heard this but won't fully understand it. So first of all, these are self-imposed rules.
Yeah.
They're not rules that exist in law or it's just Treasury, almost orthodoxy, right? It's what people... It's
kind of.
It's the consensus of what...
Since the 1990s, most governments have had some set of rules like this. In fact, all of them have had some
But this
set
is
of
very
rules.
much self-imposed.
Yeah, totally, yes.
And essentially it is what you said, where you will impose for things like building stuff, but we won't borrow
You won't borrow
increasing
for
funding.
salaries, for electricity, for day-to-day spending. What they
So
call
things like
current
paying our
spending.
teachers more, paying our nurses
So
more.
you won't borrow from that. That will come out of taxes. That's how the thing is set up.
Yeah, and why is it getting so much criticism?
It's getting so much criticism because what's happening in practice is that, look, these were kind of, if memory serves, these were brought in by Rachel Reeves. She said, these are our fiscal rules at a time when inflation was lower and government borrowing costs were lower. And what that means is actually you can write these rules and they don't seem too tight, right? It seems like actually borrowing costs aren't going to be a big thing for you to worry about when you go into government because you have to pay the money, the interest on the borrowing that you made. That's part of the costs you face as a government. That's what that £1 in 10 that she's talking about refers to. Those rules were written when things seemed a little less rocky economically. I mean, it's not just Britain that's facing this, right? If you look across the developed world, across Europe, you can see what's starting to happen in the US, in North America. It's kind of looking rocky everywhere.
Why?
That is
it COVID?
Well, it's kind of, there's a couple of things there. One of them is an after effect of COVID, I would say, which is that, look, because governments borrowed so much, debts across the world, government debt across the world has really jumped up as a result of COVID. There was really, really big expenditure on, well, absolutely everything, but healthcare, all sorts, vaccines, this kind of thing. So debt everywhere has gone up. There is a slightly more complicated, I think, longer term impact of COVID, which you see some of the costs around long COVID as the most obvious example, where people find that they can't work for as many hours as they used to, except these kind of slightly mysterious combinations of illnesses and things that are after that. If you look at the figures in Britain, and this does attract a fair bit of attention from this government, from previous government in the media, number of people claiming that they are not able to work because they're too ill, right? So the number of people claiming benefits of various sorts with that has really risen. And frankly, I think this is almost certainly reflecting a real problem, right? Which is that we do have more unwell people, and long COVID is certainly part of that. So that's a cost for government. So all of this is stacking up, right? And things look difficult. And her problem is her fiscal rules don't really account for any of that. They were written for a happier, simpler time. I think they thought they could just walk into government, it's all going to be easy.
Yeah, and so there's been lots of questions about taxes, and because it's been clear, particularly as the government has had to U-turn on a few of its cuts, in essence, because of the pushback from the public and from its own parliamentary party, things like the winter fuel payments, for example, disability cuts, they had to roll back, though they didn't go all the way back. And now she has announced to the media, at least, it wasn't in her speech, that the 2-child limit on welfare payments was going to be scrapped in some form. We can expect that there'll be some sort of tax rises, but we don't know what they will be. She, I believe, has ruled out VAT.
I think so, yes.
Where do you think the most likely tax increases are going to be? If you were to take a guess, we know you don't know, but if you're going to guess,
I think they're in a terrible sort of situation on this, and this is partly why, if you look, you get every so often with this government. Actually, it's been a few times now where you have this kind of financial market sort of upset, and so people who trade government debt and who lend the government money, in effect, are sort of looking at this government and thinking it has a series of problems it can't solve. So as these fiscal rules it says it will stick to and it won't deviate from, it has the need to somehow meet those fiscal rules either by increasing taxes, but its manifesto says no rise in VAT, no rise in income tax, no rise in national insurance contributions, no taxes on working people, as the Labour ministers like to say, and its backbenchers and a lot of the general public just don't want to see any more cuts, right? We've had 10 years, more than 10 years of austerity in various forms, including things like the 2-child benefit cap, something that's pushed 500,000 children into poverty. So the government's stuck. stuck. So what does it do? It runs out of options. It's ruled out a wealth tax, which I find bizarre. It won't do some slightly more technical things, but it's a lot of money that we're now paying to the Bank of England for the cost of quantitative easing. That comes to 20-30 billion pounds a year. It said it's not going to touch that. So it's really just leaving piles of cash out there and not doing anything with it. I think they're going to have to. They've trailed this and they've talked about it. They said they will have a look at property taxes, which is likely to include maybe adjusting council tax. There are some ambitious schemes to get rid of it entirely, bring in new taxes, change the stamp duty that you pay when you buy a house. These are quite big, complicated things that they won't have time to do for this budget, but it's not looking great for them.
Because listening people might go, what do you mean council tax? Because that's one that they directly will pay, right?
Yeah.
We don't think council tax will go up.
I think it is going to go up, but that's something that the government sort of hands over to local authorities to try and set. And it's
but they kind of force local authorities based on the amount of money that they give them, right?
Exactly.
They
Right. So most local authority money comes from the government, right? It really very substantial, 80-90%, that sort of thing. And local authorities themselves have a whole load of statutory duties and other things they have to deliver in law, like social care.
Social care is the biggest one, right?
Yeah. So it's really, really difficult for local authorities. They've had
social care is pushing some local authorities into bankruptcy because of
right.
how it's their statutory duty, but they can't afford to do it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this wealth tax, because one of the big calls from the left has been a wealth tax. Richard Bergen has been a big champion of this I've seen. Rachel Reeves called people who call for a wealth tax steak oil salesman on conference floor.
Yeah, it's a bit. It's overstating it. I mean, look, you can get carried away with wealth taxes. It's not like this.
What is it?
Well, in this case, you're saying. I mean, the proposal that's doing the rounds, the one that's developed a real campaign around, people like Gary Stevenson have really argued for, is that look, if you have over £10 million in assets, we will pay. We should charge you 2% a year on those assets. In other words, you've got £10 million, you pay whatever the value over that. 2% of that you pay in tax every year. That's a lot of money, by the way. I mean, that's going to hit, in this country, probably 20,000 or so people. And you could expect to raise from that really quite substantial sums. So maybe 24 billion is one of the figures doing the rounds. Again, these are sort of estimates, but it's going to be that kind of level. Now, that's a lot. It doesn't actually solve every problem the government faces. Depending on who you talk to, the amount of money the government needs to be looking for could be up to £50 billion. Probably it's going to be about 30 billion. So you'll get you some distance. It doesn't solve everything. But to say it's snake oil, to say you're not going to look at this, just bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, the French government have done it, right?
Exactly.
And Macron isn't exactly Trotsky.
No, not at all. And the Spanish government has implemented a wealth tax for a number of years now, and it raises a fair bit of money. There are a number of countries. Switzerland, to my surprise, when I discovered this, is one of the highest wealth taxes on the planet.
Really?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of places that do this and raise money out of it, and it's gaining a real traction because actually, if you take the last several years, several decades now of rising inequality, of a few people at the top having more and more wealth, which is basically useless for the rest of us. It's just hoarding wealth in some form. A wealth tax is a way of putting that resources that they're hoarding into use, and that's why it's getting more and more attention, because people can see the inequality and they can see the state of the economy and put two and two together and say, here's a way to start to solve that.
Yeah, and I think there was a lot of conversations early on. I mean, I was a big proponent of a wealth tax, and people saying, well, that just means that the richest in society, the ones who, quote unquote, I'll disagree with this, but create wealth and jobs in this country, would leave. The FT, interestingly enough, did a major investigation and found that this isn't actually true.
Yeah.
Right, that they don't tend to leave, and they haven't been leaving the country, because there was this idea for a good couple of months that was very prominent in in the national discourse that we were having some sort of financial drain or a financial flight out of the country.
No, it wasn't happening.
Turns out it's not true.
Yeah, the figures were basically ropey, which was also a good bit of work the Financial Times did in looking into some of those numbers that were doing the round. Extraordinary numbers.
They're doing some great work with
that sort of thing.
Times.
Oh yeah, no, it's there you go. There's a recommendation. Read the Financial Times. There you go. But this was a really good bit of work they did, and you're absolutely right. The evidence that we have suggests, okay, look, some rich people might try and shift where they are because of a tax. That might happen with a few. You can say in a few cases this will happen. In most cases, if you're wealthy, you're living somewhere because you like it, because if you're in London, it's because it's a nice place to live, your kids go to school here, it's where your friends are, it's where your job is, it's where your network is. These are all the things that add up to why you live somewhere. You don't just go, oh God, the tax has gone up a few percent, I'm off. That's not how the world works. So you find in practice, rich people aren't actually that mobile. And actually in practice, you find a lot of people are quite happy to pay the tax. They recognise that this is making a contribution. There's a campaign group here called Patriotic Millionaires. There's a bunch of really rich people saying, we want to pay more. Yeah.
And so I guess my question is, do you think there's any way that they may succumb to some form of wealth tax, or your reading on Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer is they'll resist the whole way?
I think they'll be scrabbling around for everything. So they may well change some part of capital gains tax, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one.
What is capital gains tax?
Capital gains tax is a tax paid by, again, a very small number of people typically, which is why most people don't see it or hear of it. It's like if you sell something like an oil painting that you bought for one price and it goes up wildly in value and then you sell it, that's a capital gain. You pay the tax on that. Well, you have some shares and you sell the shares.
It's
make
mostly
a load of
like
money.
stocks and shares, right?
Yeah, stocks and shares, financial assets, things of this sort, which means it's actually paid by very, very few people, right? Especially people who do lots and lots of trading stocks and shares. In other words, really rich people.
Is an increase in capital gains tax not in essence a wealth tax?
Yeah, it is getting in that way. It is kind of, because it is like saying, okay, here's a stock of wealth that you have. It's gone up, and we're going to tax that increase.
Because normal working class people don't have stocks, do they?
No.
Like no.
Well,
the
I mean,
majority.
You could sort of roundabout have some via a pension, right?
Yeah.
You might have some in an
Does it affect pensions?
It shouldn't do, because in this case your tax will be different on the pension.
Right.
That's something I think the government isn't. They might, this is getting a bit sort of into the weeds, they might sort of chew away at some versions of pension tax relief, and it's at least plausible they do this. I suspect not, because it tends to be quite unpopular with all sorts of people. So they're in a difficult place, and it's not easy for Rachel Reeves to get out of this. She could rewrite those rules. This is true, but given that she stakes her entire kind of credibility on it, it's like she's done for as chancellor if you do that. You can't just turn around after 3 years and say, we've got to change this. It's worth bearing in mind that fiscal rules do change a lot. I mean, the previous governments we've had have been rewriting them every 2 years or so as the situation changes. And you also find, bodies like the International Monetary Fund, again, not exactly a Nestor Trotsky, is saying the fiscal rules are a problem. It's actually doing the opposite of what you thought they would, which is stabilise things. It's causing this continual panic, because there's always this panic about, you're not going to meet the fiscal rules, right?
I tell you, one of the things I noticed the difference between this conference and last conference. So last conference, you couldn't move without hearing the word growth. That was the strategy when the Labour Party came in, that they said the fiscal rules would work because we were going to grow the economy. I don't think I heard it once.
That's very striking, and I can see why, because there hasn't been much growth.
Yeah.
I mean, again,
have they abandoned that strategy?
Well, they ought to, because it was always like, this is just make-believe fantasy economics, right? You can't just turn up and like, because we're sensible, the economy will grow. And it's just not how you're going to. If you want this economy to grow, you're going to have to do some things like spend more money in places that really need it. You're going to have to do some big, hefty investments. You're going to have to sort out social care. You're going to have to sort out the NHS. You're going to have to do some of the really chunky underlying stuff that's been a problem for years now. That's really the drag on productivity growth and growth.
I mean, it's what you said earlier, right? We have a lot of people who are ill and not working. Yeah. One of the things Starmer has continuously said he seems to be bothered by is the number of young people not in work and not in education. And they've announced something about that, about if you're not in work or in education for 6 months, you're a young person.
Yeah, it's like carrot and stick is how they're trying to present it. I mean, it sounds quite a lot like stick, and not too much in the way of carrot. This is the sort of
But a lot of that stuff, does that not require spending?
It does. And this is the other bit, is like you start to stack up, okay, they're not actually that big and spectacular announcements, but even things like the 2-child benefit cap, which they should get rid of, that's £3 billion they'll have to find on top of everything else. Now, in terms of a government budget of well over £1 trillion, it's not actually very much. They could just do it. But in terms of like Rachel Reeves meeting a fiscal rule, that's another $3 billion they're going to have to find. My guess is they won't entirely get rid of it. They'll do something like, if you have a third child, you get a slightly reduced rate of benefits and so on for every additional child. I think they'll taper it, as they'll call it, I suspect.
James, you want some good news?
Go for it.
I've got a job offer for you.
Okay.
I've made you Chancellor of this country.
Okay.
Right.
I was just about to say how glad I was to not be Rachel Reeves' position, but all right.
So I've just sacked Rachel.
Right.
I was made Prime Minister earlier.
Okay,
I don't know if you
fine.
because you've not looked at your phone on the way up. And you're going to be my Chancellor. What would you do? How do you get us out of what Gordon Ramsay on Kitchen Nightmares would say, we're in the shits?
We are, and it's difficult, and this is where my sympathy is somewhat limited for members of this Labour government, because they've brought a lot of this on themselves, but it is difficult. I think one of the things we have to do is address this inequality issue. You have to get the resources that are tied up in enormous hoards of wealth, like incredibly wealthy lumps of property all around London, all around here, that isn't really doing anything. You have to start to put it to work. That's why you need a wealth tax. So you do that, and it's the first thing. You make it clear that you're going to make that.
So you're bringing a wealth tax?
Definitely bringing a wealth tax.
Do you get rid of the fiscal rules?
I think the fiscal rules is... You see, I tend to... Some people just go, you just rip them up and do what you like. I wouldn't do that, because I think underlying a lot of the problems we have are some really tough issues for this country. Like government debt is high. Right? That is a real thing. The interest you're paying, that is a real thing. We have to import 50% of our food, 50% of the gas that we use to generate electricity to heat our homes. So you're really import dependent. So you're in this kind of weak, vulnerable position. I would rewrite them very substantially. I think that's part of what you'd want to do around that.
So would you borrow to spend on day-to-day stuff like salaries
I think in practice, if you loosen the fiscal rules, which you should certainly think about doing, you're going to end up with a program of government spending which includes some borrowing to go on day-to-day spending. And some of that day-to-day spending is kind of investment. If you're saying, okay, we're going to spend money on teachers' salaries, that's an investment in all your kids' futures. So you might want to think about how you're going to nuance what you mean by investment. It can't just mean, okay, this is a building. That's literally a physical thing we've done. What about the fact that if you spend more on education, we know that is going to be good for the people who get the education, and it's good for the economy as a whole. You get more growth later in the future. So you do that. The other really obvious one is the one I touched on, which is got to sort out the relationship with the Bank of England. £30 billion a year handed over to the Bank of England, who, by the way, can print their own money. It's absolutely
Wait, why do we give them £30 million a year?
This is losses on... This is weird, really weird, but this is the quantitative easing programme the Bank of England introduced way back in like 2009, middle of the financial crisis, which involved them printing a load of money and buying government bonds, which at the time didn't seem to be, it wasn't imposing great costs at the time, but as interest rates have gone up, the amount of money it's paying to commercial banks for the money it is given them has gone up with it, and so we're now losing a great deal of money every year. It comes to about...
So we're just paying £30 million to the Bank of England?
We have an agreement with the Bank of England that we will indemnify its losses on quantitative easing, so we just hand over this money.
Mate, people are about to lose their minds, but this is my really uneducated. Why are we paying? Why are we just saying we're not giving you that?
This is a very good question.
Come and get it. I've got an army. Do you have an army?
Well, it is a bank, and it's not just any old bank. It's a central bank, and it's not about to go bankrupt. It can't do that, right? So yes, there aren't many other central banks who do this. The Swiss National Bank doesn't do this. The Federal Reserve doesn't do this, right? This is not. It's a really weird setup we have here. It's just costing us money for no purpose.
I'm a bit short of time. I want to ask you about some of the politics of this.
Go on.
Government's Keir Starmer's in a really difficult position. The conference seems to have maybe bought him a bit more time because the speech has gone down well.
Yes.
But there was noises about whether May would be the end for him, and there's some noises that the budget could be the end for him. How bad would the budget have to be, do you think, for there to be
I think
either a change in Rachel Reeves or Keir Starmer?
It seemed...
It's not going to happen, right?
I don't think so. I mean, why? Because
it'd have to be bad, right? It'd have to be Liz Truss.
The politics of this is like, okay, you get rid of Keir Starmer somehow after the budget or before Christmas. You then take over, and then you still run into the May elections, which are still going to be bad because you're not going to turn things around by then.
And that's what I'm hearing. None of the leadership potentials want to run into May.
You just land out on Keir Starmer and then you go for it.
Yeah.
But the same thing with Kemi Badenoch.
What could be? I mean, 30 seconds. What's worst case scenario do you think could be the budget?
Worst case scenario is that they get up to just about meeting their fiscal rules like they always do, and they still run into some sort of financial panic on the other side of that, which creates huge new costs for government, and it looks like an absolute shit show. Right, that's sort of the thing that could happen, I suspect. Right,
that was James Medway. James, thank you so much. That was really interesting, man. First of all, one day I'm going to go to knock on the Bank of England's door and say, give me my money back. That's it from Politics Uncensored today. No Zoe this week, but she will be joining us back next week, where she'll unwrap conference a little bit from her perspective, and I'm sure we're going to pick up on the terrorist attack that seems to have happened in Manchester, which I spoke about on the top of the show. Join us next Thursday at 5 p.m. where we unwrap the week's political talking points. You can stay up to date with the show by following @Politics Uncensored UK on social media, where you can find me at Ali Milani Live. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back and catch up at FUBARradio.com or via the FUBAR Radio app. Thanks for listening. See you next week for another episode of Politics Uncensored.